Hello and welcome to this talk. Expecting the apocalypse? What is it? Well, our format this evening is we'll have a brief look at the apocalypse and then we'll answer 3 commonly asked questions. But to begin with, we have a spoiler alert and also a key takeaway for you. For those of you who are perhaps disturbed by the terms apocalypse or Armageddon, the key message from this short talk is don't worry. God is in control, and whilst it may seem that the world is a scary, frightening place, the world is not going to end in a fiery ball. God is in control, and we need to trust him. The other point that we would like to make is that this is not a complete study of the apocalypse. This is only a short video, and it's just a taster. But if you'd like to know more, then please do get in contact with us. However, the idea of God being in control does not comfortably fit with the popular narrative of the apocalypse. This invariably shows a collapsed civilization with a wasteland of crumbling buildings, motionless cars, bodies strewn everywhere, televisions, radios silence, governments have collapsed. Lawlessness abounds, the power grid has gone, and all is silent and bleak. But then, like Noah and his family stepping off the ark, a few survivors who took refuge in underground bunkers slowly make their way to the surface, and they begin to gather in small groups, searching for meaning in their now shattered world. Novels and films with such apocalyptic doomsday scenarios abound everywhere, and so popular is the theme that it even has its own genre, and Wikipedia has over 200 apocalyptic films on offer. So unsurprisingly, when most people hear the word apocalypse, it engenders an immediate association with great devastation that only leaves a few survivors to carry on and to scratch a living. Now, whilst history shows that humanity in general has a penchant for bringing much suffering into the world, and is certainly capable of pressing some nuclear buttons to destroy it many times over, this is not in God's plan. The world, as we have said, will not end this way. Perhaps, however, your view of the apocalypse is more of a slow burn, shall we say, with ice fields melting, the sea rising to swallow cities, and continents becoming unlivable deserts as global warming takes its toll. Again, though, we would categorically say that this man-made vision is not God's vision and not his plan for the earth. And so, turning specifically to the apocalypse, it may surprise you to learn that the term apocalypse does not actually appear in the Bible text at all. It is in fact a Greek term meaning something uncovered or unveiled, or in fact the revelation, which is of course the name of the last book of the Bible. We do recognize, though, that some versions of the Bible have the word apocalypse in the title of the book, next to Revelation maybe, but it's not in the text. Most religious beliefs about the apocalypse are pieced together from different texts throughout the Bible, meaning that the apocalypse is actually presenting guidelines for interpreting a series of events in the world that is around us. And when we say around us, this actually means throughout history, from when the revelation was given to John right through to the establishment of the kingdom of God on the earth. This is actually very interesting and pertinent, as this means that the apocalypse is not the one-off event that Hollywood would have us believe. Whilst it is also interesting is that some events have already taken place, and therefore we can state that we are living through the apocalypse. It is true, of course, that as the return of Christ draws nearer and nearer, things will go from bad to worse. But viewed in the light of a gradual unfolding of God's plan, as opposed to some cataclysmic event, this may provide some comfort. Notwithstanding our comments, there will be a great battle called Armageddon, but that is not the subject of our talk. As we have said, the apocalypse, or the unveiling, was given to John and actually includes the establishment of the kingdom of God. Therefore, and perhaps surprisingly, it is true to say that the apocalypse actually covers some good news as well as bad news. Essentially, when Jesus Christ returns to the earth, he will forcefully put down all opposition and establish the kingdom of God. This will be the start of the 1,000 years of global peace, prosperity, and abundance. This millennium of joyous, meaningful existence is a stark contrast to the apocalyptic scenarios imagined by many today. Whilst there's bright times ahead, there are also difficult times ahead. But the future is bright. Now, if you find this hard to believe, then just let me quote to you some words from the end of the book of Revelation and ask the question: if God is going to live amongst us, would he really destroy his creation, as some doommongers predict? And so, reading from Revelation 21, from the New International Version, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth has passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God.'" And it gets better. "He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." And so we can see from this that the apocalypse does, in fact, have a beautiful ending. But from the following questions, we do acknowledge that some people find the apocalypse and Armageddon frightening prospects. And so I would like to briefly address 3 questions. The first is the apocalypse and Armageddon the same thing? Armageddon and the apocalypse are often used interchangeably to refer to the end of the world, usually in a biblical sense. But they are actually very, very different things. Armageddon refers to a place, while the apocalypse, as we have seen, is the reading of a series of events. In fact, in a couple of weeks' time, there will be a talk on Armageddon, and we ask and answer the question, can we survive? I hope you can join us for that talk. So the second question, when will the apocalypse happen? Well, as explained in my remarks, essentially the apocalypse, the unveiling of God's plan, is already underway. In fact, God's plan has been unfolding since creation. Now, if you may mean, when will things come to a head? Well, the honest answer is that nobody knows. People have been trying to predict this for hundreds and hundreds of years. I can, however, focus the mind a little by offering two things to think about. The first is in the book of Daniel, which contains details of a huge image of a man made of various metals. There is not time to go into detail now, but the metals represent various empires that have ruled the world. The statue stands on two legs, which are made of iron. As I say, we can't go into detail now, but the iron represents the strength of the Roman Empire, which, if you recall from your history lessons, was split into two parts. The western part was ruled from Rome, and the eastern part was ruled from Constantinople, hence the two legs. Eventually, the Roman Empire disintegrated and was never replaced by another empire. Because of this, the statue actually stands on feet, partly made of iron and partly of clay. As you can imagine, this makes the statue unstable. And essentially, this is the situation we have today. A lot of unease in the world. Ultimately, a small stone appears and breaks the statue into fragments, which are ground into dust and replaced by God's kingdom. This small stone is the return of Jesus, and the kingdom is partly described in the passage we quoted, Revelation 21. Our first answer is, of course, a global one, covering empires and countries over many hundreds of years. The second answer is more personal. As we have said, nobody can predict when Christ will return. But to be honest, this doesn't really matter. What really matters is, what are you doing to prepare it? At some point, we will all die, whether it's a young age or an old age. And therefore, for each of us, the return of Jesus is only our own lifespans away. For when we are raised from the dead, the kingdom will have arrived. However, there are conditions to this, and so the important thing is, what action will you take and what action will I take to become part of that kingdom? Again, another huge subject we cover from time to time. But Mark in his gospel record says, "Whosoever believes and is baptized will be saved. But whoever does not believe will be condemned." And so, moving on to our third and final question. I am worried about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. What do they mean? The four horsemen only appear in Revelation chapter 6, and are highly symbolic. To set this into context, we have to remember that this is a book about Christ's revelation, his unveiling to his servants, showing major events that will take place prior to his return to the earth. The first 6 seals, another symbol, are all opened in Revelation chapter 6. The 7th seal is opened in chapter 8 and continues to the end of the book, where it leads to the establishment of God's kingdom. The first 6 seals, therefore, are all preliminary events that will lead up to the return of Jesus Christ. With this in mind, we now look at Revelation 6, where we find the 6 seals, disclosing events that will lead up to the end of this evil, mismanaged age. The first 4 seals, as we said, are also the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. These horsemen represent events which, we stress, have been ongoing since this prophecy was given, but will increase in intensity as time goes by, before the climactic return of Jesus to the earth. Specifically, with regard to the 4 horses, the white horse of the apocalypse represents religious deception. And Matthew 24 says, "For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many." Religious deception was the first major trend to develop after Christ's departure from the earth. That is, people and religions falsely representing Jesus, which have deceived many and continue to do so. Next, we have the red horse, which represents wars. Of this, Jesus says, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. But the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. Wars have continued around the world since Christ left the earth. But warfare between great nations and kingdoms, including world wars, of course, will increase towards the end of this present world order. And this fits with the image of Daniel that we spoke about, where the feet are partly of clay and partly of iron. Just as oil and water do not mix, iron and clay doesn't mix either. And that leads to tensions. The third horse is black and represents famines. And Jesus says there will be famines. And to underline this fact, the rider of the black horse has scales in order to weigh scarce food supplies. Of course, famines are not new and have been a feature down through the ages, and so this horse has been on the scene for a while. And finally, the pale horse of the apocalypse represents pestilence, disease, epidemics, pandemics, and death. Since Jesus ascended into heaven, we have seen pestilence, that is, disease on a large scale, throughout history, from the Black Death of the Middle Ages to COVID more recently. So we can see from this that the image of these fearsome horses wreaking havoc on the earth is a process that is already underway. They will not suddenly appear, as some would predict. Now, our talk has almost completed, but an important point to realize is that once each seal is opened, it remains open. In other words, each seal is added to the seals previously opened and taking their toll. And that will greatly intensify as the end of this world order approaches. And so in closing, and returning to our key takeaway, the world can be a frightening place, but we stress it will not end in a fiery ball. God is in control of world events, and we look forward to the kingdom of God on this earth that we have briefly touched on. Thank you very much.